Hey, how's it going? With the new Summoner Duels mode, it would make sense that eventually there'd be some sort of statistics or like some tiering in regards to just units, whether that's unit viability or even just usage. I came across these two charts in regards to what's essentially the Smoggin of Summoner Duels, which is pretty interesting, and I thought we could go over it. I think it'll be interesting to go over what is currently being used in the metagame in the Summoner Duels Restricted and Unrestricted modes. So yeah, let's just get into it. Given that the game has over 700 units at this point, I think it would be better to go over the Restricted mode where only units from books 1 through 3 are allowed to participate. If we look at that chart, it's definitely less clustered because of the fact that there are just less units to go over, but you still see some of the more popular units even from this day. For example, Legendary Azura is at a 28% usage, which is relatively high, all things considered. I know a lot of people have access to Legendary Azura because there were so many opportunities to get her, especially from that one event where there was a 25% chance that you'd get her for free. But in any case, I do think the extra movement that she is able to grant, as well as the additional buffs, makes sense as to why she is so popular in the restricted mode. And same thing for Brave Hector. Personally, I figured Brave Hector would be number one because he's just ridiculously strong. Given that he has no armor weakness, he can prevent follow-up attacks, he has Slick Fighter in his weapon, Slaying. He has a lot going for him, and I don't think I need to be the person that explains why he's so good because it's really, really apparent if you play the game. But in any case, Hector, I'm not surprised, is up here, but I figured he would be the top one because of the fact that Hector is just Hector. But I think it also makes sense given the fact that Legendary Azura is a refresher that can grant additional movement and stats to every stat. So yeah, that's probably fair. Although, number 3 kind of caught me off guard with Legendary Ephraim. I know he's really good as a nuke thanks to his Special Fighter and Null Guard, but I just didn't expect him to be this high. Maybe it's just because I think more units that are easily available are going to be more popular, but given that most of this list is full of 5-star exclusives and legendaries, I guess it would then make sense that Legendary Ephraim is up here. He has Kanto, he hits really hard, he has Special Fighter, he has Null Guard. He has a lot of stuff in his weapon. Plus he has innate healing, so he doesn't have to worry about taking too much damage. So yeah, I guess that does make a bit of sense. Brave Makai is also really good in this mode because of the fact that she has armor and cavalry effectiveness on top of just being a flyer, so she doesn't have to worry about terrain restrictions, which is actually really nice because a lot of the maps do have some sort of terrain restriction, whether that's traps or forests or whatever. Makai being able to bypass it while also having a guaranteed follow-up attack and armor and cavalry effectiveness actually makes her a really decent nuke. Plus, you could always run Kanto if you really wanted to on her because she does have access to it, although it's probably not the best because of the fact that she only has 2 movement. But in any case, she is pretty good, so I can definitely see why she's up here. And then we have Reinhardt. That isn't a shocker because Reinhardt is just a really strong cavalry mage who hits hard and is in the 3 and 4-star pool, so it's not that difficult to surmise as to why he's up here. And I could keep going on and on about these characters and their percentage, but I feel like we're just going to be here all day if we do. So I think it'd be better if we moved on to a different visual in regards to the restricted mode. I think this chart prevents a better representation of the current data that we have because it includes units that are not necessarily in the overused tier. For example, you have Eliwood and Brave Eliwood in there, as well as Julius, who are really, really good units to use. I think there's also one thing that needs to be pointed out in that this isn't necessarily a viability tier list as opposed to something you'd see in like an Aetherite tier list like on GamePress, but it's basically a usage tier list where you would basically just calculate how often the unit is going to be appearing in a map. So for example, the reason Azura is all the way at the top is because she's so common, and according to the data, she appears at least 28% of the time based on the 125 samples. However, I do think performance does play a bit of a role in determining how often the unit is going to pop up. However, it's not always the case because if you see at the bottom, there's a Resplendent Sarah there and a Setsuna, both of which aren't really that good, but they show up in the sample data nonetheless. And considering the fact that this is only 125 samples, you aren't seeing every single book 1 through 3 unit on this list. That being said, I do think viability does play a bit of a role in it, but it's not always the clear indicator, especially if you look at the blue chart and the white chart below the blue chart, you see Ares and Eldigan in different tiers despite the fact that they're exactly the same unit. As for the rest of the units in overused, I can definitely see why Brave Alm and Loki and Legendary Hector and Gunther are there. They do have their own niches, whether that's with support capabilities or just hitting really hard. You also have Brave Lucina, which I think is kind of interesting because the game doesn't really favor enemy phase strategies. You could always run near save and far save armors if you want to prevent stuff in the player phase, of course, but I don't believe Brave Lucina really does that well in this mode as a support unit because of the fact that you're not playing against AI, you're playing against real players who don't want to initiate on a unit that they can't kill. So I don't believe Lucina actually has that much of a solid performance in this mode, but that's just me at least. Of course, things get way more interesting when you go into the unrestricted mode, because that's where every single unit can be used. And at the top, you have Brave Erica, of course, with a staggering 45% usage, which is just insanely high. I'm not saying she's bad by any means. In fact, she is an incredible unit in this mode because of her armor and cavalry effectiveness, her slaying, her Moonlight Bangle, her Canto. She has a lot going for her, so I get that. But according to the 450 samples gathered, you have what's essentially a 50-50 shot at running into a Brave Erica, which is insanely high. And again, it does make sense. She does counter a lot of stuff. She is a complete menace. And on top of the fact that you also have Secret Maneuver, you can always spam Moonbows or Lunas if you really wanted to, because of the fact that Moonlight Bangle is just going to shred every single unit. And then, of course, right below it, we have Yuri with a 20% usage, nearly 21%. And this one I'm not surprised about either because of the fact that Yuri is just ridiculously strong. I don't remember the Yuri banner performing all too well. I think there was a chart. If I can find the chart, I'll put it up on screen. But I don't remember the banner performing all too well. But I guess there's enough Yuris out in the wild that 1/5 of your matches are going to contain a Yuri. And again, that's also understandable. He's basically a cavalry unit with infantry perks. He has Canto, he has Slaying, he has access to lethality, he can spam AoE specials. He's a disgusting unit. And then afterwards we have Duo Peony. Duo Peony I was a bit surprised about because of the fact that it was really hard for people to get her because of the color share, both on her debut banner and her rerun banner. So to see Duo Peony up here is pretty interesting. She is a really solid unit because of the fact that she can provide a second dance, which is still really strong, even though you get 6 actions to work with. She has all the stuff that made original Peony really good, on top of the fact that she also has a Cardinal Spur that grants additional attack to the unit in range, which is really nice. And of course, the armor I definitely expected to be up here was Fjorm, because having the ability to counter every single unit, on top of the fact that you have Ice Mirror with Hardy Fighter, is just ridiculously strong. I don't think there's much more to say on it. Fjorm can counter every single unit. She can reduce damage by a lot. She can return damage by a lot because of her Ice Mirror. And she has Mystic Boost in her weapon, so she's healing and keeping herself healthy. And of course, we also have Reagan, which makes sense because not only is she a free mythic, but she has Canto 3, and her kit's pretty much complete with Sior's Shell as well. She is a pretty decent menace, all things considered. Ninja Korin I expected up here because she's also a recent unit on the Ninja banner, so a lot of people probably pulled for her. She has Gale Force, she's a 3-range cav with Canto, well, given that she has Canto in her B slot, but whatever. And she has a Brave Tome, so she hits twice, guaranteed. And then Azura fell from 28% to 12%, which is still relatively good when you consider the fact that this is 7th place in a sample size of 450, as opposed to a sample size of 125 with only restricted units. And then beyond that, it's just more 5 stars, seasonals, legendaries, mythics, a lot of units you would probably expect up here because of their performance rather than anything else, as opposed to the ones you'd see in the restricted mode. For a similar reason, a lot of these placements are definitely based on usage rather than performance, but you also have to consider the fact that maybe the reason that a lot of these units are being used so much is because they are so good. So that's why Erica and Yuri are naturally at the top. Of course, Erica probably has that edge, which I probably forgot to mention because a lot of people got her for free. Not everyone, but a lot of people did. But beyond everything in overused, we also see some other units that are barely on the chopping block, such as Legendary Dimitri and Ascended Ligurn. And then right below that, we see a bit more variance with supports and more nukes and tanks in general, such as Veld. I expected Veld to be a bit higher because I know Marbles made a video on it, and a lot of people seem to understand Veld's potential in this mode now. Maybe time will tell and he'll go up more, but I do think he definitely has a lot of potential as a support unit in this mode because his tone is just that good in it. And of course, you also have your 3-move dancers, which makes sense. Duo Sigurd's a really solid unit because he can provide reposition for 2 units, and he has 3 movement, which is really nice for getting units in the range really quickly. Racing is a budget 3-move dancer, which is really nice. However, you will have to run Beast or Dragon allies if you want to have the 3 movement on turn 1, since most of the time you're going to be grouped up together. And I think it's also interesting to note that some of these units just completely disappeared from the list. And for some reason, there is a OG female Corrin on the list. I guess there was a bit of variance in the samples, but considering there were 450 samples in this set, I feel like there was going to be that 1 or 2 units that just are on the list for similar reasons. But given the fact that there are 450 samples in this list, it probably makes sense that you would have one of those outlier units, because the data is just based on who's bringing what. But this is why we also have an overuse here based on the percentage. I think it's important to emphasize that a lot of these units could end up being higher naturally because of their actual performance. But I think it's hard to currently rank them as units in this mode because there's so much that still needs to be discovered before there's like any confirmations as to whether or not some units are actually way better than others. So for example, most people recognize that Kanto is really strong in this mode because of the fact that you're just able to hit and run really well, especially Kanto 3 on Reagan and Oder. But I do think that when we get more samples in, there will be more variance in the data, and we'll probably see more units in overused or maybe even outside of overused. But beyond that, there's not really much else to discuss. I just thought this was an interesting thing we could go over because of the fact that there is just a lot of data that can be covered on here. But let me know what you think. Are you surprised by some of the placements or appearances of certain units? I'm certainly surprised by OG female Corrin, but given that it's barely 1% or 2%, it's probably been in like 4 matches at most. Oh, right, and if you want to contribute to the actual data, I believe there's a poll you can fill out that allows the person to record the data and update it based on either what teams you're using or what teams you're running into. I thought that was pretty interesting. But in any case, this has been the Summoner Duels usage tier list. I guess this is a tier list. I don't really know what it is, but whatever. I thought this was cool, so I wanted to go over it. Anyway, thanks for watching, and take care.